Welcome back to the Blue Jays Way episode. Me and Tyler are pleased to be joined by the Blue Jays Central host and insider, Jamie Campbell. Jamie, how are you doing?
Doing well, Curtis. How are you?
Doing great. I mean, it's been a weird offseason, obviously, because everything's up in the air with the fact that baseball might not be starting on time, but we're glad that you're here to, talk some baseball with us.
I appreciate it. It's been uncertain before, most recently 2 years ago when the pandemic caused us to have to watch a 60-game season that started in late July. So I guess we're kind of used to the prospect of not having a season start on time.
And my first question I want to ask you is that this sounds crazy because I think for most hockey fans, they're used to lockouts and that kind of scenario. But in the baseball world, we haven't had a lockout since 1995. So a lot of people haven't, especially of our generation, haven't experienced a lockout yet. So Could you maybe talk about, what it's been like in the past lockouts and give kind of like a summarization of what they've been like in the past for some of our listeners?
There were many of them, lockouts and strikes through the 70s and 80s. The 1981 season was interrupted and played in two halves. And of course, the 94 season, we never saw the end of it and never witnessed a World Series. So, people sort of my vintage are accustomed to it to a degree and have seen this kind of thing before. I recall, and I believe it was the summer of 2002, having to cover a negotiation between the owners and the players that could have derailed that season just as 94 was derailed. And it came down to some last hour negotiations in New York. And I was situated with a live microphone and camera outside of the MLB offices near Wall Street in New York City. And I distinctly remember the tone of that time being, there's no way we can allow this to happen again. And I was really impressed with ownership and players coming together to ensure that yet again, a season wasn't interrupted, because by that time we were somewhat accustomed to seeing this kind of thing. So here we are in 2022, faced with the possibility of, say, a delayed start to spring training, a delayed start to the season. The game financially is extremely healthy. The bargaining agreement between players and owners, as far as players are concerned, doesn't appear to be too healthy, because you have some of the superstars of the game now at ages 22 and 23 making, in some cases, minimum wage. And there's a definite imbalance there. And I think that move toward not ensuring that a 33-year-old whose best years are well past him is getting that retirement contract. I think the move toward compensating the young superstars is necessary, frankly, because it's Tatis Jr. and Guerrero Jr. and some of these other players that are basically carrying the weight of the game right now. And maybe they deserve the riches earlier than when they're washed up and in their mid-30s. So I understand it. It's going to be a long and arduous process. I hope that the worst that we see is a shortened spring, perhaps, and maybe a slight delay to the start of the season. But who knows? We've been here before, right? We've had seasons, for the most part, interrupted and eventually canceled. Who knows what it's going to be like? We could see. I joked with Justin Morneau through a text the other day. He was telling me how the Twins, a team he covers, are going to be in Toronto in early June. And I texted him and I said, well, that could be opening day. So we'll see you then. So who knows where it's going.
And, with the thought in mind that the season starts on time or relatively close to on time, what are your expectations for the team after sort of a lost season where they had, 90 plus wins?
It depends. They're an exceptional ball club. It's sad that you win 91 games and not make the playoffs and have that potential sort of ripped away from you somewhat dramatically on the last day of the season. But hey, they have been in the toughest division in baseball for decades. So nothing new with respect to the Blue Jays and their chances every year going into a season. In a way, what they've done, they've enhanced the ball club. Sure, they had Barrios already, signed him to an extension, lost Robbie Ray, got Kevin Gausman. So almost by elimination, they're pretty well exactly where they were a year ago. And that's a good team, right? That's a 91-win team. They've enhanced the bullpen with Garcia signing and all, and they've got some holdovers in Romano and Simber and Richards and guys like that. So I think the bullpen will be strong. Positionally, I think they have some things that they need to address. They're very, very right-handed, as you probably know. And I read almost every single day about the prospect of acquiring Jose Ramirez from the Cleveland Guardians. And, it's fun to read about. And boy, wouldn't he be a wonderful addition at third base, which frankly is probably a position of need for this team. But as I've experienced in the past, and you guys have witnessed in the past, the Blue Jays, when it comes to acquiring players and making deals, are completely unpredictable. Nobody, and I mean nobody, saw Josh Donaldson coming in the 2014 offseason. Nobody saw that. And look what he did. He became, very quickly almost became like a franchise icon with his MVP performance in 2015. They make moves sometimes that nobody sees coming. And as much as it's so predictable that people expect them to go out and deal for someone like Ramirez or maybe Matt Chapman from Oakland or whatever it might be, I always like to say, whatever you think they're going to do, whatever you read that they're going to do, they probably won't. They'll do something entirely different, and it will shock you, and it will improve their club.
Yeah, I think you kind of already brought it up, but obviously the pitching rotation is going to kind of have a little bit of a new face to it this year with the addition of Kevin Gausman and obviously Robbie Ray leaving on pretty similar deals for both of them. Did you think that was a case of the Jays just having more interest of the ability of Kevin Gausman? I know he's also younger than Robbie Ray. Or do you think-
Well, I believe, if you recall, there were some well-founded rumblings that the Blue Jays were really actively seeking Gausman's services a year ago. So, when a front office falls in love with a player, it doesn't mean they fall out of love with that player. So I think they focused on him from the beginning of the free agency period. And then with Ray, I think it came down to timing as well. If they were in negotiations with Gausman and talking about the numbers that they ultimately settled on, that doesn't necessarily leave a whole lot of money to re-sign a guy who won the Cy Young Award. And you might recall that prior to December 1st, there was a real push for free agents to lock into contracts. If we hadn't seen the lockdown, you might have seen an entirely different process take place with free agent pitchers, because it would have been a little more secure. You would have had December and early January to sort out what teams you might want to re-sign with, or what players' teams were going after. Well, there was this mad rush prior to the lockdown to get a deal done so that you had the security of knowing you were under contract once this bargaining agreement gets completed and agreed to. So I think it was a matter of timing. I think it was a matter of they've always loved Gausman. They're very similar pitchers in many ways, very different in others. And I think it's a real trade-off. I really do. I think Gausman will be just as splendid as Robbie Ray does. So I don't think you lose anything in seeing Robbie Ray sign with Seattle.
And speaking of like free agent noise and everything before the lockout came into place, what were your thoughts of seeing so many people talking about Freddie Freeman possibly coming to Toronto?
Yeah, I forget. I think it was Carlos Baerga who sent out some kind of a social media primer suggesting that this was a possibility. And I understand Freddie Freeman's attachment to this country. Both his parents were from here. He's represented Canada internationally. It's all wonderful and fine, but he's also established himself as an iconic figure in Atlanta, helped them win a World Series for the first time since '95. It's really hard to see him wanting to walk away from a place that has become so special to him. On top of that, it kind of paralyzes the Blue Jays lineup if he ever did end up joining the Blue Jays, because where is he going to play? There's two options really: first base or DH. And a guy who's played as much first base as Freddie Freeman has and won an MVP is probably not just going to gladly take money and then move aside to be a full-time DH. While the MVP in waiting, Vladimir Guerrero Jr., plays that position. And maybe more importantly, position flexibility has become such an aspect of this game that if you were to start a season, as great as the production might be, you're starting a season with one of those guys as the full-time first baseman and the other is the DH, and then you might switch them off from time to time. Where does that give you an opportunity to, say, rest a George Springer and yet keep his bat in the lineup in the heart of the season? Or if there's any injury issues with any of the primary players who can stay in the lineup and hit, but maybe not necessarily play a field, what opportunity do you have when your DH position is already taken up? And I've heard it. I understand the draw. It's as much of a draw as maybe the idea of Joey Votto coming home and playing for the Blue Jays, but I just don't see it happening.
And I think it's been a couple weird seasons, obviously, with COVID, and then obviously not just for ourselves, but everyone in the city of Toronto, and to some extent in Canada, if they could get to Toronto. We're happy to see the Jays finally come back to the Rogers Centre. Obviously, you and Joe were back in your spot in the Rogers Centre. So could you maybe talk a little bit about what it was like to walk back into the Rogers Centre for the first time? And I think it was almost 2 years, and just be able to be there with the fans and watch that home opener of sort.
I have always said my preference will always be, we have two types of presentations of Blue Jay Central. One is a road game, which puts us in studio. The other is a home game, which puts us in the ballpark in a studio. And my preference is always to be in a ballpark with a game going on behind us. And so to go the entire 2020 year without even setting foot in a live baseball stadium was very difficult for me, because the advantages of being on the concourse at the Rogers Centre is that, one, batting practice takes place a few hours before the game. If we need information or just want to catch up with a player or two and get a pulse of what's going on, just walk down to the field and away we go. There's the energy of actually being there and watching the game develop in front of us and on the screens in front of us and being present. That's so different than when the Jays are in, say, Baltimore and we're in a studio and it's just the two of us and it's really quiet. There's a massive difference between the two of them. My preference has always been to be on site, especially for the big days like opening day, Canada Day, or even that last game of the season when they were about to sweep Baltimore and then sit and watch the scoreboard to see how the Yankees and Rays were doing and the Nationals and Red Sox. That was unbelievable. And that's just not the energy that you can derive from being in a studio with nobody else around. So when we finally did return in July, it was after a year and a half away. It was remarkable. It really was. It was just such a great feeling. And, I hope we don't have to, I hope when this summer rolls around, we don't have to sort of plan for studio settings because the Blue Jays once again are playing home games in Buffalo. I hope we don't have to. No disrespect to Buffalo. It was a wonderful site for them to be part of for a while. But, they are the Toronto Blue Jays. They should be playing in Toronto. Let's hope that they are this year.
Yeah, I was at the first game back against Kansas City as a fan, obviously, and the atmosphere in there it felt like a playoff game, and it was crazy. But
it was wonderful, yeah.
Yeah. as a Blue Jays broadcaster, but also a fan, what do you think should be done in the reported renovations to the stadium?
Well, that's a great question, Tyler. Not much, to be honest with you. I'm really mixed on this whole idea. And I was aware long ago of this possibility that they might do what St. Louis did and rebuild the Rogers Center entirely by constructing half of it up against the edge of the Don Valley Parkway while the season was in progress, and then finish it when the season ended. The changes I would like to see are awfully subtle. As much as I love the hotel being there, and people can rent a room and look out over the outfield and watch a game from their hotel room, as someone who sits in the concourse area, it would be really nice to see downtown, a more open type of scenario like PNC in Pittsburgh, where, if the ball game's boring and the Pirates are getting destroyed, as they often do, at least you've got this great view of downtown Pittsburgh, right? Whereas there isn't much to look at if you're a Blue Jays fan, other than a big old jumbotron and a whole bunch of people leaning over the windows in the hotel, which is kind of a unique sight when you think about it. All of that said, I'm not particular. I know people who have seasons tickets would love a stadium where the chairs are turned more toward home plate and the pitcher's mound, and that seems like an easy fix to me. But otherwise, I think we embrace the Rogers Center in the way that people embrace Dodger Stadium, for example. And Dodger Stadium's been around since the 60s, and they've really not done much in the way of changing it. Well, goodness, as much as you want to complain about the Rogers Center / Sky Dome, think of the history of that place right now. I mean, we've had, World Series played there. We've had All-Star games played there. We've had incredible playoff games played there. And that's just baseball. I mean, not to mention Grey Cups and concerts and things that people remember. It's really kind of established a bit of a history now because it's so old. So I love the place. I don't really care if they do much to it. That's more for a paying customer. And at this point, because I'm still employed, I'm not a paying customer.
Yeah, I think it would be really weird if I walked into a Blue Jays stadium where my shoes didn't stick a little bit, because I mean that's just what the Rogers Center is. It's always been that way, and it's such a great stadium. And I kind of switching more over to you personally. I know you've done a lot of roles within Sportsnet and Rogers. You've worked at the desk. You were a play-by-play announcer. And one of the more fascinating stories I've read about was when you had that phone call with Vin Scully that you wrote about. It's been a bunch of years ago now. And I know that it's been told a couple of times, but what I seem to, like, as a journalist, I seem to find that's been left out is, what did Vin Scully tell you? Because that's one of those things where it's like, it's great to have the phone call Vin Scully, but he has so much wisdom. I was wondering if there's anything that was like lasting that he told you.
Yeah, well, he did. So to set the scene, when I was doing play-by-play, the season was 2007. We had an interleague series in Los Angeles against the Dodgers, and when we arrived, all the visiting broadcasters tend to meet each other and share information. I had a quick meeting with Vin to introduce myself, and and we were going over some notes on the series itself, players to keep an eye on, that kind of thing. He's so well researched. He hardly needed any input from me on the Blue Jays, but I was there to offer whatever he may have needed, and he gave me some great insights into the Dodgers at the time. I had struggled at that time with what to do in the event that a Blue Jays pitcher, or any pitcher for that matter, gets deep into a no-hitter, in terms of, how best to handle a no-hitter. Because 2 years earlier, Dustin McGowan had toyed with a no-hitter, taken one into the ninth inning, and it just so happened that I wasn't on the broadcast that day. It was on CBC. And I remember thinking, boy, if I ever got a chance to call a game like that, how am I going to handle this? because there are a lot of people around baseball who believe in jinxes, and I'm not one of those people. And there's this old saying in baseball that you don't mention a no-hitter while a no-hitter's in progress, and I don't believe in that. I've heard of pitchers throwing no-hitters or perfect games who talk about it freely on the bench to the horror of their teammates, but they talk about it anyway because they don't believe in the same things I don't believe in. Anyway, I asked Vin if we could have a discussion about how to handle a no-hitter. And he says, you know what, Jamie? He says, it's a good discussion. He says, why don't I give you a phone call when we've got a little more time to talk about it? And I said, great. I gave him my phone number. But I forgot that we made this plan to speak to each other at some point. And then about 2 months later, the Blue Jays are in Detroit. And when we were doing games, we would have a meeting, we being Pat Tabler or Rance Mullenix or Darren Fletcher, whoever the analyst was, plus our production crew, on just how we're going to approach the game that night. And it always took place at 4 Eastern if it was a 7 o'clock game. So there at 4 Eastern, I'm sitting in this meeting and my phone rings. And at the time, my then wife had an uncle who was kind of a nutball who would do impersonations sometimes. And my phone rings. And the first thing I'm thinking is, why would anybody who knows me call me at 4 o'clock in the afternoon? They know I've got a meeting. Anybody that knows me knows 3 hours before a game, I've got a meeting. So I excused myself really quickly from this meeting, pick up the phone. I said, hello. And he goes, Jamie? I said, yes. He goes, it's Vin Scully calling. And at that time, I didn't believe it was Vin. I'd kind of forgotten about the conversation we had in Los Angeles. Instead, for whatever reason, I thought that this crazy uncle was calling me to piss me off with an impersonation, and a really good one, of Vin Scully. And now I'm annoyed because it's interrupted this meeting that I'm supposed to be in. And my response to this legendary broadcaster, the greatest ever, was, oh yeah, what do you want? I mean, I'm going red just thinking about this. And he goes, oh, have I caught you at a bad time? And I said, I still didn't think it was him. And I said, yeah, you have. I'm in a meeting. And I'm thinking I'm talking to this uncle. And finally it dawns on me, this is not the uncle. This is Vin Scully. And I panicked. And I yelled really loud. I said, Mr. Scully, is that you? And he says, why, yes. And I said, oh, Mr. Scully, I am so sorry. I honestly thought you were someone doing an impression. And thank goodness he says, oh, Jamie, don't worry about it. It happens to me all the time. I said, look, do you mind if I call you back in about a half an hour? I have a really important question to ask. He goes, no trouble. So I take down his number. Meeting ends. I walk back into the meeting and Tabler says, who was that? I said, it was Vin Scully. He says, what? I said, you were barking at him. I said, I know. I didn't think it was him. So our meeting wraps up. I called Vin back and I said, hey, listen, here's what I got to get a handle on. I have to be sure about. I said, end of the 7th inning and a Blue Jays twirling a no-hitter. How do I handle this properly? And he says, easiest thing to answer, Jamie. He says, I have called 22 no-hitters and 4 perfect games. He says, it's your job as a broadcaster to ensure that the audience knows exactly what's going on. He says, I'll remember by the 7th inning saying, hey, everybody, call your friends. Something special going on here at Dodger Stadium. Sandy Koufax has a no-hitter against the San Francisco Giants. Let your friends know. And we'll be back right after this with the 8th inning. And I thought, man, if Vin Scully is saying it's okay to talk about a no-hitter while one's in progress, then that's all I need to know. And I have, from that moment on, I just held to the notion that if it ever happened to me, I would never care about what anybody thought afterward. If there was one happening, if it ended in the 8th or 9th inning, if one was completed, too bad. It's my job to let the viewer know what's going on, and I'll mention it if I have to.
Sorry, just a quick follow-up. Did you ever get to meet him in person again while you were still doing the play-by-play?
Nope, that was the last. So that was 2007. We never went back to Dodger Stadium. The Dodgers, I think, came to Toronto, but he didn't travel with them. There was a point where he just stopped traveling beyond the National League West. And I still have his number, but we sort of lost communication from that point on. But it was great to get that opportunity to learn from, the greatest at his craft.
Yeah, I was a goalie in high school, so anytime
you look like one.
Thank you. Anytime you had a shutout going, it was never tell the goalies, like never talk to him while he's got a shutout going. That was kind of my thing.
I've heard that too, but that should never extend to a broadcaster.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
It's now we live in a different era now where the score is right there on the screen. So if you really didn't need to say it, you don't have to.
Yeah.
But I grew up at a time when there were no scores on the screen. So, I needed to know, hey, what's the score here? And, Bernie Perron as a shutout going into the last half of the third period or whatever it might be. You need to know that kind of thing. And I'll be honest with you guys, and I'm not going to mention names here. But there was a point after my play-by-play career where, some other people took over the role. And soon after I exited that broadcast booth, there was a Blue Jay who toyed deep into a game with a no-hitter, and the broadcaster chose never to mention it. And I had a friend who was astounded when a 2-out base hit broke it up, astounded that it was happening in the first place. You know why? They had no idea it was happening. And that's because the broadcaster never mentioned it. And to me, that's a failure of the job.
Mm-hmm. No, that's a great point. No, I agree now, but in high school, if someone mentioned a shutout while I had a shutout going, they'd get a stick to the head.
In game, that's fine, right?
Yeah.
So I'm guessing in the middle of a major league no hitter, it's up to the pitcher to determine whether or not they're interested in talking about it. But if I'm on the current Blue Jays and Jose Barrios has got a no hitter in the 8th inning and I'm playing third base, I'm not going over to the bench to say, how about that no hitter you're throwing? Unless the pitcher comes to me and says, how about this no hitter I'm throwing? And I'd say, well, yeah, it's pretty impressive and we'll lock it down for you.
Yeah. And I'll keep this as my last question because we've been here for a while. But you've captured some really great images over the year in your photography that I've seen on your social media. Have you always been into into photography?
When I was very young, I went out, purchased a camera and dragged it to almost every sporting event and sometimes concert that I ever attended. And I don't know why, other than that maybe there was a little bit of me that thought one day I might be a photographer for Sports Illustrated or something like that. And I guess it was the desire to record the images of the things I was seeing. So I spent a lot of time dragging a camera to Exhibition Stadium or Maple Leaf Gardens or goodness, everywhere. Anytime we'd go on a road trip to see some baseball games in the United States, I'd always take it. And, half the time would sneak down around the 6th or 7th inning and take photographs when people were leaving because the game was out of hand. And I just got in the habit of doing it and loved it. And it was a nice little hobby to have. And it's blessed me now because I've got these photo albums in my basement that I can pour through every now and then and actually vividly recall some of the sporting events I went to because I was there to capture them on film.
And then my final question for you is, you've done a lot for the Blue Jays outside of being on the desk and being in the broadcast booth, in the sense that you've gone on the Winterfest tours, you've done a lot of banquets and that kind of stuff, and usually tend to drag along a Blue Jays player or manager or someone with you to these random places in Canada. Is there one interaction or one time you brought a Blue Jay to, I don't know, maybe somewhere in like Nova Scotia or Saskatchewan that, was kind of a funny moment?
Yeah, if you got time, I can give you a really good one. We were to do a fundraising event in Saskatchewan. There was a large crowd expected, and good sponsorship around the event. So oddly, there were some other people involved in other celebrities involved too, not just me and a particular baseball player. So the other celebrity, and I'll have to figure out if I can remember who it was leaving from Toronto. So instead of booking us all on commercial aircraft, they hired a firm in the city in Saskatchewan we were going to send a private jet to Toronto to pick us all up. The guy I had recruited to come with us was Marco Estrada, who at the time was living in Phoenix. And Marco, because he was in Phoenix and not in Toronto, could not come with us on the private jet. But unfortunately, Marco, on the day he was supposed to leave Phoenix to get to Saskatoon, and I can assure you, from Phoenix to Saskatoon, not an easy route. There's at least 2 stopovers. There's no direct. And Marco had to get up at about 7:30 in the morning and make a 9 a.m. flight. And if he misses the 9 a.m., he's never going to make it. And of course, he calls me in full panic on his way to the airport. He'd slept in, forgot to set his alarm, and he's totally going to miss his 9 a.m. to wherever it was going, and then a stopover, and then, change of plane, and then on to Saskatoon to meet us. Meanwhile, I'm about to board a private jet from Toronto, and I'm panicked because if Marco's not there, there's really no sense in me being there because, we're part of the whole baseball portion of this fundraiser. So thankfully, I had some enterprising people with me, among them Jackie Redmond, and we sat around and said, well, listen, we've got this private jet. Why don't we go pick him up somewhere? And we had to erase that possibility because not all of us had passports, couldn't cross into the United States. Okay, so we can't do that. We finally found online a flight from Phoenix to Minneapolis, from Minneapolis to Winnipeg, that he could get on because it was leaving in an hour. So we called Marco and said, Marco, here's what you need to do. Go to the airport, keep going, get on the flight to Minneapolis, and then you're going to change planes and go to Winnipeg. And he says, well, what am I going to do in Winnipeg? I said, we're coming to pick you up. So we went to the pilot and said, hey, listen, do we need to stop for fuel anywhere along the line on our way to Saskatoon? And he says, yeah. I said, where are you going to stop? And he says, I was thinking Thunder Bay. And I said, will it make it to Winnipeg? And he goes, yes, as a matter of fact. I said, do you mind if we stop in Winnipeg? He goes, no. Great. Why Winnipeg? He says, because we got to pick up Marco Estrada. And I tell you, it worked out like a charm. He made the flight to Minneapolis, had 35 minutes to get to the gate to get his plane to Winnipeg. And I'll never forget landing in this private jet in Winnipeg and sitting around waiting for a phone call. And 10 minutes after we landed, my phone rings. He goes, hey, it's Marco. I'm in Winnipeg. What do I do now? And I said, just hold tight. We're coming to get you. And 15 minutes later, he was in a minivan with us on our way to the private jet. And I can safely say this now, we dove into the booze pretty nicely between Winnipeg and Saskatoon. We pulled off an absolute miracle getting him there.
Oh my God.
And he was a hit. He expectedly was a massive hit at the dinner too, which was great.
That's so funny.
Yeah, it was great. Great time.
It's a great story because most people that's a common thing. And most people think, oh, these MLB players don't have to worry about catching their flight. But just because you're an MLB player doesn't mean that you don't have to get to your flight on time. That's a very interesting story.
Well, and remember, during the season, these guys don't have to worry about when the plane leaves. They just need to get on the bus at the stadium. And once they're on the bus, they'll make that flight. It's in the off season when they have to fly commercially that, they actually have to make a plan. And we managed to avoid, because his name was published as, here are the celebrity guests. He was one of the primary celebrity guests. And I thought, we can't, we've signed some contracts here. We can't disappoint them. You gotta get yourself to Saskatoon.
That's a
really
great
funny
story. And we want to thank you because we've taken up a bunch of your time. And we just want to thank you for giving it to us and telling all these great stories. You've been really great to us, and we really appreciate it. You coming on, because I think we tried to get you on last season, but obviously you're a very busy man with all the Blue Jays games that you do work on. So we want to thank you for taking the time, obviously right now, and joining us.
No trouble, Curtis and Tyler. It's been great joining you guys. I appreciate you waiting for me. It is difficult in season, but a lot different when the off season rolls around.
Thank you again so much.
Thanks.
And we'll definitely have to have you on again sometime.
Sounds good, fellas. Be well.
All right. Thank you.